Welcome to UPThinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of UPThinking Finance. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Victory is not always winning the battle, but rising every time you fall." I'm really pleased today to have two of my most favorite people on today, coming to us that are both repeat guests, and I just appreciate the time and looking forward to the conversation. First, we have John Waters, who's an Irish free thinker, talker, and activist, who's coming to us from Ireland. And then, of course, Alex Krainer, who's a former fund manager, futures trader, and the founder of iSystem Trend Following, who's coming to us from the beautiful Principality of Monaco. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Emerson.
Thank you. Good to join you, Emerson and John. One small correction. At the moment, I'm in Croatia. I'm not in Monaco.
Okay. Oh, so you're in the beautiful, well, I don't know, is it Principality?
No, it's a liberal democracy, you know. Freedom and human rights, all that.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, just like we have here. Great. Well, listen, and before I forget, both of you have work. You can be both found on Substack at johnwaters.substack.com and alexkrainer.substack.com. You guys, your commentary and your thoughts, you just, to me, it's all about timing. And I think people emerge when you need to hear other voices. And so, John, I thought we'd start with, and, my thought was we'd start kind of here, and you've referred to Ireland as a petri dish of what's going on to the West. So let's start in the petri dish and kind of expand our way out. And, if we have time, we'll find our way onto this side of the Atlantic. But you recently ran for office. You've shared a lot of thoughts in your writings about that experience. And maybe just let's dive in there and see where that leads us.
Yeah, I ran for the European election in Ireland for the constituency, which is kind of about half the country, the upper half of the Republic, which is where I come from. And, I ended up getting something like 13,000 votes in the first preferences. We have a PR system, so if you can stay in, basically, you keep getting votes. But if it's you need to get through a series of gates in order to kind of reap the pastures of votes which may lie ahead of you, And I kind of, without thinking about the third count, something like that. But that wasn't a huge surprise. I mean, I ran for weird reasons, because I wanted to alert people to the possibility that this mechanism is here. And even though it has completely, not alone let us down, betrayed us, but it has destroyed us, the political system, the party system. It's one of the ways which we could hope to reclaim our country via, as it were. There's a lot of people on our side who were urging people to deregister, don't vote, they're all the same, it's a swamp, they're swamp creatures, blah, blah, all that stuff, which is I kind of understand at some level, because that's the way it's been. But, when you actually look at it, if we're going to reclaim our countries, it seems to me, there are kind of a limited number of ways you can do it. 3 of them begin with V, which is, violent insurrection, velvet revolution, and voting, right? And there's also something you wait for it to spontaneously combust, the entire system and everything that's part of it and everything that's propping it up. That's not likely to happen any day soon. So that you're down to those 3, and ultimately the only one that you can actually take action on really legitimately. I mean, I'm not, violent insurrection makes its own decisions when the moment comes, and it's not for somebody to kind of, it seems to me at this point, say that it will or won't happen. I suspect it will happen, and if this goes on, it will happen all over the place. But it's not. I wouldn't be in a position to recommend it, because I'm too old to be fighting. So so therefore, it seems to me that we have to find a way into the system. Now, I've been saying that our political system in Ireland, that all the political parties need to be treated as illegal organisations. Once we get our country back, they need to be all banned. That there's a prison sentence that goes with membership of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I felt that, we have to send a signal to our people. Well, this is our system. It's our country. It's our democracy. It's our freedom. And these guys are only in there at our permission, at our behest. And if we can take them out, we can tell them, no, you're finished now. We don't want you anymore. So what do we do then? Well, we've got to find the people who will replace them and replace those parties. So what I was doing was really taking that initial step to send that signal to people that you can do it. And once I had done it, then to kind of say, well, what it was like, what were the drawbacks, what were the potentialities, and to be honest, there were more drawbacks than potentialities, to be honest about it, But at the same time, I felt I had to do it, and I mean I was asked to do it. It wasn't an idea that came to me spontaneously. I did run before for the general election. That's for the Parliament in Dublin back in the spring of 2020. Believe it or not, just before all this stuff started. I don't know. I got some intuition. I felt that something was seriously going awry. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to. You know, I can't remember precisely what was the trigger that just made me decide, because I wasn't particularly well at the time. But I did run in my local constituency, which is the worst possible in Dublin, which is the worst constituency in the country for me to run in. You know, at the same time, I nearly got 1,000 votes, which, you know, if that was in the west of Ireland, I'd be the chieftain of a pretty large village. You know, so you know, so that's really why I did it, Emerson. And when I look back on it, I mean, I learned a lot, and to be honest, some of it, I mean, what I learned was that the whole thing is stitched up. I mean, we had clear corruption where illegal immigrants were being bussed into the polls, you know, on the polling day all over the place and told to vote for particular candidates. You know, Tammany Hall stuff, you know. Well, we Irish, we gifted Tammany Hall to America, and now we've got it back. Thanks very much. You know, I appreciate that you repaid this enormous debt. You know, and then the other part of that was, you know, that I didn't really feel that the campaign. You see, you couldn't really. This is a strange paradox, that I went in to tell the truth. I wanted to tell people what was going on. But then you're in there and you find it isn't that easy. Because there are these sort of set pieces, you know, like not on the media. They wouldn't let me on the media, on the mainstream anyway. But there were like set pieces like the farmers associations would invite all the speakers to a big event, right? And we'd be all lined up on the stage, 14 of us on one occasion. And but it was all controlled. Like the questions were all scripted. And there was two policing journalists standing in front of the stage kind of saying to you, you know, no, stick to the question, go back. Don't, you know. And so everything was completely, so there was this surreal kind of thing that the best you could do would be to sneak in occasional lines, like say that we have to deal with the totalitarianism of the European Union, you know, and people would look at me and I could see them, you know, and then they would say, you know, and so, but I felt that the audience understood what I was saying when I would do that. But it wasn't permitted. It was, you know, verboten. And so you couldn't really go beyond a certain point, and you had to keep answering the most, but like, you know, the Common Agricultural Policy in relation to farmers. That was the big one, you know, and these journalists would say to me, no, well, how much more money are you going to put into the pockets of farmers? And I would say, none, you know, but you know, but like, I would like the farmers, like, to be able to continue. And to be able to continue feeding the people. I don't want the people to starve. And then, you know, and so on. So there's two different levels. But you're losing all the time because it's so rigged and so fixed and so rigid.
Alex, I mean, you've been writing a lot about what's going on in broader Europe. I mean, does this sort of bleed into this sort of sentiment that John's talking about? I mean, do you see this manifesting itself throughout?
Yes, obviously. John's experience with running in the Irish elections is a whole new level, meaning that, you know, like he has the first person experience that I do not have. But, you know, from the perspective of a voter, of a European voter, as a Croatian, I'm entitled to vote in elections. It's very clear that the system is deeply dysfunctional, and it is deliberately made to be that way. The will of the people is the last thing that is needed by these democratic establishments. They want the legitimacy of the popular vote, but they don't want any uppity people meddling in their business. And their business is defined by their donors. And the donors are people that we don't really know who they are. You know, they're different corporations, tycoons, bankers, you name it. But, you know, they themselves are frontmen for other interests that are deep in the shadows, and we don't know who they are. And you know, with time, this the dysfunctionality of the system has ossified. So, over time, wherever they see that some democratic free will of the people might actually manifest itself in actual policy, well, they blocked it off. And so now we are seeing absurd things. And I can't resist, just 2 days ago we had the opening of Paris Olympics, which was a very tacky, distasteful, inappropriate insult to 99% of the people in Europe and around the world, and particularly the French people. This was representing them to the world. I can't imagine that the average Frenchman isn't absolutely incensed about this. And who brought this forth? Who, we know who was the producer, the choreographer of all this, but somebody decided to hire that guy. And somebody signed off on his, he didn't just, it doesn't work that way. You just do whatever you want. Somebody had to say, like, yeah, let's run with this. And so they did. And then, that's Europe. But things are not much better in the United States, where we had a coup in the Democratic Party, and it was so blatant that you wonder, okay, so if this could happen, why are you telling me that 2020 couldn't have been stolen? The 2020 election. So this could happen, but that was no way. No way could those elections have been stolen. I don't know. I'm not convinced anymore. Well, I was never convinced, really, but I mean, let's say from the point of view of a normie who believes what they tell him in the news. And then, the attempted assassination of the former president, and then the fact that there's no official press conference about it. There's no word about the investigation, that the people who are in charge of the Secret Service, the DOJ, the NSA, the Department of Homeland Security, they're all dodging and obfuscating. It's so completely blatant that the system is advancing towards a break point, and there will be a break point. We don't know, what might happen from there on, but there will be a break point, because not only are things very obviously dysfunctional, people have no way to bring forward their grievances and seek redress. The system is only diverging farther and farther away from the actual will of the people.
I think the same person that hired the guy to do the Olympics opening was the one that advised, Anheuser-Busch to use that Mulvaney character on the Bud Light commercials, because it's the same result, right? But so here's a question. I know, John, go ahead, and because here's I'm asking for your thoughts on this, because you're right, Alex. It seems it's like there's no pretending anymore. I mean, I don't know how anybody can walk. I mean, to think that somebody could get that close to Donald Trump in a situation like that, when clearly he's a threat to everything that's going on. How does that even happen? And it's like you said, it's so much in your face. It almost just seems intentional, and I don't know, maybe that's my perspective, but if it is intentional, then my question to you gentlemen would be, why? I mean, where's it headed? So John, I'll throw that in your court.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to kind of even say what reality is, because immediately after the assassination, you had this babble that started up about, was it a fake assassination? Was Trump in on it? And suddenly the whole thing becomes fractured, and you can't help thinking that this is actually in some way an induced context, it's an induced situation, that they can actually do this now, that they can fragment reality. So nobody knows if there's solid ground underneath them at all. And this again resonates with the idea of the election. The point I was coming to there really was that what they're operating is a pseudo-reality. It's a completely false reality. But the point is, the way they keep what we call the normies, even though in a certain sense, we're the normies, they're the abnormies, because they don't really understand anything about what's going on, and it's like that. They're fed this version, and in the version that I was in the election, even though everybody was very polite to me, they're creating this demonic enemy of the people, not just themselves, but of the people, and I'm it. You know what I mean? And they're very polite to me, but they're kind of looking at me and saying, no, you're it, you're the bad guy. And yet I've been in Irish journalism for like 35 years, and they all know me, and they know that I'm a bit, crazy and all that about certain things and have certain views that they don't agree with, but they know that I'm not Adolf Hitler. But that's what they're required to believe, and they kind of do in a funny kind of way. So you get these journalists who would come up to me and say, I read an article, and he comes up with an article that I wrote maybe 15 years ago, and he said, that was a great article, and we're having this bizarre conversation, and I've written all this stuff about journal liars and all the rest of it for the last 4 years, basically saying you guys are criminals. And he's not even pretending it's happened. And so it isn't even clear why I'm the bad guy. Because they're not actually, there's no charge sheet, even though they could, by their standards, say I've called them all these names or whatever. But they don't. So, then you go back to Trump, and you can't even, you look at this like, and afterwards, the aftertaste is like, was it an assassination? Was it not an assassination? It's like it's put into this kind of neverland, in this grey area, and we're waiting for the next thing to happen to obtain clarity from that. So, it's an entirely different way of presenting reality, which is not to present it. It's to present a different version, that runs simultaneously to reality and sometimes intersects with it. But you can never be sure what that moment is. Is this reality now, or is this the fake thing that they're creating? So this is how bad it is, and that's before we even got the deep fake stuff into this, Wait till that happens, and we can all just go to bed and pull the blinds and put the duvets over our heads.
Alex, just so you know, I had emailed John because that was and he's, he writes. I don't know if you get to read his stuff as often, but you were talking about the whole assassination thing, and kind of my reaction I shared with him was, I'm a big RFK guy, the original, from the 60s, and I've read so much about him and just how he transformed as a person. And I actually, I've watched, there was a great documentary that I can't remember the lady's name who did it on Netflix, 3 episodes, but it was brilliant. And I found myself weeping, every time I read about the assassination of RFK, because it just seemed like he was such a monumental figure in American history anyway, and you just wonder what could have been, And then here you have Donald Trump getting shot at, I mean, some people died around him. And then I was telling John, you got this picture of the fist in the air and the American flag in the background, and it almost just seems too perfect. And that's the thing. It's like, and I think my intellectual mind says, well, of course, you can't fake that. I mean, they tried to kill the guy. And there were documented people who did get, that were casualties. Yet that's the thing that goes on here. So anyway, do you have any thoughts on that, Alex?
The reality has become so surreal now that you might almost be inclined to believe anything. Anything is possible. But, Donald Trump is obviously such a problem for them. They are on record making statements, from the director of the Chatham House who wrote an article, from statements of various European politicians, EU leaders, who are all saying that, my God, if Donald Trump comes to power, is the end. It's like everything is up in the air after that. It's a massive problem for them. And then, that assassination attempt didn't come out of the blue. It came out of at the end of years and years and years of political, public relations and judicial harassment of the man. And they've done everything they could to stop him, to put him behind bars, to remove him from ballots in different states. They've gone outside of the bounds of law, to try to stop him. And then, the same basic structures of power have killed before. It's not like this is some kind of a red line where we're too decent to assassinate a political candidate. Somebody killed RFK, somebody killed JFK, somebody killed McKinley and MLK and Malcolm X and Abraham Lincoln, and the list is very long. Actually, the list is very, very long, and that's just like top level political leaders, middle level operatives. But the body count is massive. Seth Rich, the assassination of inconvenient people is routine business. And, it was just a couple of years ago, Esther Salas, the judge who was supposed to take on the Deutsche Bank money laundering case, which involved Jeffrey Epstein case, well, somebody dispatched an assassin to her house, and that assassin took out her son and wounded her husband. So, the people who are grasping at straws to say that this was a staged assassination attempt, yeah, maybe it was, but this wouldn't be just like, if it so happens that this assassination attempt was staged, then everything is Snow White. Everything else is Snow White, and the Democratic Party and the DNC and whoever their donors are and whoever is pulling the levers of this political establishment are clean as a whistle and they wouldn't hurt a fly. That's not the case.
Just at the RFK business, I mean, I completely, I'm at idem with you about RFK, Emerson. I mean, I was only a kid at the time. I didn't really hear about JFK until he was dead. That was the first almost that I became conscious of him, whether he'd been assassinated. I remember that very clearly, hearing it. But I remember far more clearly RFK. And I remember when the day that RFK died, being serving mass, and it was announced from the altar, and it was like, I was overwhelming grief for me, a little kid, in County Roscommon in Ireland. Like, this guy, he was such a charismatic and promising figure. And I, like you, I've read all those books, and I mean, I couldn't get enough of them in various periods. And he remains to me the kind of the guy who is the lost promise of America. Maybe if he'd gone on, who knows what would have happened. But he has that sense, much more than JFK for me. But you see, that reality that we had then isn't there anymore. I mean, Trump is like a cartoon figure. Now, that's the way he's been engineered. It's not his person. Of course, he's not a cartoon. He's a real man. He's a personality, and he has feelings, and he has all that stuff. But to some extent, he does play up to this, and they have constructed of this caricature, which, like as Alex says, like that they have created this demonic notion that has no basis in reality, in anything he said or done, that he's going to kind of, once he gets in there, he's going to lock all the doors and he's going to stay there forever. And it's not even as long as he lives, which, wouldn't be forever, let's say. But it's like as if it's permanent. He's going to take over the White House. He's going to declare martial law. Where is the evidence? He was president before and none of this happened. What are they talking about? They don't need evidence. They just need their prejudice. And their prejudice is based entirely on a single kind of thing, which is kind of, I don't know, how would you say this? That Trump has a certain kind of in-your-face personality. Like, he's a certain kind of guy. He says what he means, and he says it out, and he's not particularly delicate in his mode of expression sometimes. And that's it. That's it. That's their evidence. And they don't even adduce that anymore. They just say the other, because they know that that's no basis for the crime, because you don't have to go very far back in American history to find a boorish president. Lyndon Johnson, for example, used to have meetings while sitting on the bog. If Trump did that, my God, you know what I mean? Like, so What I'm saying is, it's like this cartoon. Everything is now like these cartoons, and their scripts are cartoon scripts. You know, the climate change is a cartoon script, because there are loads of people out there who could go on TV or radio any day of the week and take it apart. And you know, maybe there'll be a debate at least, and you know, you'd hear both sides. You don't hear both sides, you know. But there's someone like, say, Stephen Coonan, like, you know, who used to work for Obama, who says this issue is not settled. Like, he was Obama's climate advisor. As soon as you mention his name to leftists, they just clam up. They just stop talking, because they know that they can't beat this. This is the trump card of climate. But, you know, it's all of this is also rigged, and it's like it's for a culture that that maybe happened. If you can imagine, like 120 years ago, if you can think of that, the myth of progress has some basis to it, and that back in the past people were backward, say. Well, it's like we've become backward, you know, but while going forward. You know, it seems the more we go forward now, the more backward and more infantile we become in our responses. I mean, in public. And we become more childish, and our discussion becomes the most banal. I mean, if you can almost now be approved of by saying, if you can think of the most banal thing that is a kind of an invocation to feel good, you know, is, you know, if I was to say on the TV, you know, on a chat show, a talk show or something, say, you know, I am personally completely opposed to plane crashes, I'd get a round of applause for that. Even though nobody can stop plane crashes. If they could, they would. You know, it's like the banality of everything is like has reached such a level in our cultures now that it's like it's actually that the entire population is becoming infantilized, literally becoming younger chronologically, while aging in their bodies. And this is kind of infecting politics. It's infecting culture. It's infecting, like, the artists. Like, they're all bought. They're all paid. And they will utter these banalities, you know, because to not do so is dangerous for their particular way of being. If they want to get their books published, if they want to get gigs, if they want to, you know, get into art galleries, you know, they're going to have to make the right noises. Otherwise, they draw attention to themselves. You can't afford to just go around saying, well, you know, I quite like Trump. You know, I think he's an interesting character. You really? Yeah, really. That's very interesting. Yeah. When is your next exhibition? You know, this is where we've got to.
It's like you said before we jumped on, you know, it feels like things are heading over a cliff and a tipping point. So I wasn't going to ask this right away, but then I've got a question after this for both of you. But I mean, how important is this, the U.S. election coming up from your perspectives, you know, coming from Europe? I mean, is that a fair question?
I think it's extremely important. And I think that the reason is because, you know, United States is a massively important chunk on the geopolitical chessboard in the world. Namely, you know, the what I would characterize as the Western Empire. I want to clarify that I don't associate this with any nation. I don't look at it as an American empire, even though the United States is the main, you know, political and diplomatic and economic muscle behind the empire. But the empire is simply a network of vested interests who control the political life of Western powers, of, you know, United States, European nations, NATO, EU, and so forth. And so for them, United States is extremely important and useful as the global cop, as the enforcer of their order. And so as long as they control the United States, then they like to regard the United States as a friend, as an ally, as the you know, main enforcer of the empire, of the imperial global order. You know, and the American people have no choice, but they have to pony up the money for, you know, hundreds, maybe 1,000 military bases around the world. But at the same time, if the United States should ditch their role and maybe think, hey, you know, there's this new bloc, the BRICS. They seem to be a very, very large percentage of the global GDP. They seem to be a very prosperous nation with real purchasing power. Wouldn't it be great to export our goods and services to these countries? Wouldn't it be great to cooperate with them on a mutually respectful and constructive basis? I'm sure that if the American people were made to understand the pros and cons of trading with the rest of the world in a mutually beneficial way versus wasting their future, their economic substance, their wealth, their infrastructure, and so forth, and their blood and their blood, right, on maintaining this empire around the world and being constantly at war, no doubt that the American people would choose to cooperate with other nations and to build, to cultivate good relations. Well, that's no use to the vested interests that control the empire, and so you could see that they're stricken with a sense of panic at the prospect that Donald Trump might become the president again. And I think that for them, they would prefer to destroy and partition the United States so that this great power doesn't switch sides, right, against the imperial cabal. And so, if they can control it, they would rather destroy it. So the election now, I think, with the Biden administration, they're served well. Biden administration officials can't find a war that they don't love. All the weapons are going to Israel, to Ukraine, to Taiwan. Every war, any war. We're gonna attack Iran. No problem. All of it. We'll do everything. And then, if Donald Trump comes into the White House, all of that might stop. Remember, Donald Trump wanted to withdraw troops from Syria. He was sabotaged. He was frustrated in that. He also wanted to withdraw troops from Germany. That didn't work either, but he wanted to do it. And so obviously Donald Trump wants a different future for the United States. So I think that the election might decide the next stage for the imperial cabal, the globalists. And they might want to partition the United States, and they might want to therefore foment different secession movements. And we might even be on a how do you call it? On a juncture where we're going to have maybe a replay of the Civil War once more, because the Civil War, unlike what they taught us in school, wasn't about the emancipation of slaves. It was exactly the imperial cabal who were in charge of the British Empire wanted to partition the United States into two weaker client states that they could pit against one another, divide and conquer, right? And eliminate a rival, because the United States was starting to grow into a major power that was actually jeopardizing British control of the maritime trade routes. So the decision was made: if we can't control the United States, we need to destroy it, and we need to put it, rearrange it into two client states that we control. So the history was going to change, and we might come to that juncture again. And just a side note, it was Russia who intervened in 1863 and prevented Britain and France from intervening on the side of the South. And so in this way, Russian Tsar Alexander II helped Abraham Lincoln to preserve the Union. How? By sending his Baltic fleet to New York and his Pacific fleet to San Francisco, where they anchored and stayed for 6 months to make sure that the Brits and the French could not intervene.
The real history is a lot more interesting than what we're taught, that's for sure.
A lot more relevant to the current moment, because the way they taught us history was kind of just one damn thing after another, without context, without background, without and once you understand that this is not how history happened, then you realize that everything that's happening today is very, very related to everything that happened in the past.
So, John, you've written You've written a lot about the election here. You've written a lot about Trump. You made, I think, one comment not too long ago that said, it's either Trump or hell on earth. Um, what's your take? I mean, from the Irish perspective.
You see, there's a weird inversion that's happening in a lot of different areas, whereby good is becoming bad, or I put quotes around those terms for the moment, and bad is becoming good in lots of ways. I mean, you see this in ideological terms, left and right, whereby the left has abandoned the working class, the blue collar worker, and they ended up being adopted by Donald Trump, which is a very weird match, but it works in a certain way, right? And yet, that was what the Democratic Party under the Kennedys and with the Kennedys, etc. That was what they were. They were the people's movement, really. And that's now switched. And now, not only that, but if you look at the history of, say, Europe's attitude to America, and particularly Britain, there was always this sense, the way that those kind of anti-war movements used to always start up, but it was always against Republican presidents. It was never against the Democrats. It didn't matter what wars the Democrats got into. It was the Republicans that everybody went out to the streets about, the Bushes and Reagan and all that shit, right? So not Clinton, not Obama. And that's still happening. So now you have this bizarre situation that Biden's, is the most kind of bellicose phase in American history, recent history, maybe, in terms of its bloodthirstiness and its willingness to kind of create wars and prolong wars and for anywhere that they can find them, as Alex says. Now, this is the bizarre thing, that actually all the things that European liberals say imply they want, from an American president, they would get in Donald Trump. But they hate him. They despise him. Why? Because he's rude. And he says nasty things sometimes. And he's funny about people like them, And that's enough to make them flip their entire ideological model and cheer on somebody like Biden. I'm using Biden in a certain kind of corporate sense. I mean, obviously, Biden wasn't even there, himself, Joe Biden. He's just the guy he's the dummy in the shop window. But here we have this extraordinary situation where, all of our politics are really, they're mirroring this kind of madness. Because we used to be a neutral country, Ireland, which meant, it didn't mean that we avoided all conflicts, although sometimes we did. But, we had a particular kind of view of not becoming involved in cabals, not becoming, not selling ourselves before the fact. We would take a moral stance in a particular situation, maybe. We would send peacekeeping troops, whatever, that kind of thing. We were also very much involved in the negotiation of the the nuclear non-proliferation theory back in, 50 odd years ago. So that was a very honourable path, even though it has its critics here. But now that's kind of been abandoned without a single, discussion of it in public. Never mind a democratic vote on it. And it's pretty much, now they've signed up to some NATO thing now and so on. And so our whole lives in Europe are being coloured by what's happening in America. And none of it makes any sense. It's all a theatre, which is insane. But of course, behind it, there is something else. And that's the puppet masters. And they're just moving the puppets around just to have some activity on the stage or whatever, It's what's going on behind is that, and that's what we feel about the entire world in every way now. That it doesn't really matter what happens on the stage. It doesn't really matter what happens in the election. The future is preordained. And everybody is determined, is agreed, and the people who might have a role to play in any of this, to the good, in democratic terms, in media terms, in journalistic terms, they're all good with it. Because they just do what's on the script. They say what's on the script. And they will deny till the cows come home that there's anything else to know about this. And this is the terrifying thing, that at some uncertain date in March 2020, we woke up and the world had changed overnight. The democratic power of the people across the world, across the Western world, let's say in that narrow sphere particularly, somebody had pulled out the plug from the wall and plugged out the people and plugged themselves in. And we didn't know who those guys were. And we still don't really. We have a vague idea. We keep coming up with names for them. I call them the Combine, which is, Chief Bromden from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He used to always have this idea of the Combine was up there, they were orchestrating all our lives and grinding us down, And that's the way I feel about them. But I can't, and I can kind of speak about them in that way. But they're running the show. And in a certain sense, it doesn't really matter whether Trump or Kamala Harris, by this logic. The subterranean narrative is that Trump, even if Trump gets back in, he won't actually be Trump. He'll be a hollowed out version of Trump. And that ultimately he will have to do what he was told, or they will put a bullet in his head. And this is where we've got to, And if they get Kamala Harris, they won't need the bullets. She'll just, whatever. She'll just she'll do some word salads and it'll be fine. So in a certain sense, what I've felt for the last 2 years is that we have discussions about politics, and you listen to there's some great streams online, like the Duran. These guys know their stuff inside out. But every time I watch them and listen to their logic, I think, yeah, but does any of this matter? The history, does it matter? Is it because actually what's going to happen is whatever those bastards want to happen. It's not going to be anything to do with voting. It's got to be nothing to do with policies, nothing even to do with ideology. It's got to be to do with what do they want to do with us and our lives.
If I may very gently push back with some optimism.
Please do. Please do. Please do. I want to be wrong, Alex. I want to be wrong.
Yeah, please.
I look at the longer term context to all this, because they're gaining small tactical victories here and there, not consistently, but they do. But if you look at where they were 20 or 30 years ago and where they are today, you realize that they've been losing in a very spectacular way. For example, in 1993, we had something formulated called the Wolfowitz Doctrine. So United States was, they just quote unquote won the Cold War, and they thought that they were the sole remaining superpower and that the world belonged to them. And Wolfowitz Doctrine was basically imposing that the United States would eliminate any rival, that they would strive for full spectrum dominance. And then this same doctrine was kind of repackaged into the Project for the New American Century a couple of years later in 99 or so. And then they launched the global war on terror because of this 9/11 terror event that fortuitously happened when they needed it. And then, they went on their rampage where they were going to eliminate, among other countries, Iran and Syria. Well, did they? They didn't. Then they staged a coup in Ukraine, and they were going to basically regime change Russia and partition it and take over. That didn't happen either. Then there was the pandemic that was meant to usher a complete new normal. Remember, we were supposed to have vaccine passport, and we were going to have those always updated with the latest booster to get on the plane, get into a restaurant, a theater, on a bus, public transport, and so forth. Well, that didn't happen either, right? We're pretty much back to the old normal, in spite of the fact that they were promising us that the old normal was never coming back. And what happened to that full spectrum dominance? Well, they're getting beat by the Houthis in the Red Sea. They got their backends handed to them in Afghanistan by the Taliban after 20 years of trying to defeat them. They've pretty much lost Ukraine. They lost Syria. They're getting squeezed out of the Middle East. And everything went downhill. So from where they started and where they are today, I see a steep downhill decline, whereas they were really, really hoping, planning on, and expecting that they would have unassailable global dominance pretty much cemented by now. And not only that, but their whole agenda is now glaringly obvious for anybody with their eyes open to see. Okay, so as I always marvel, there really is a segment of the population who could convince themselves that men can get pregnant. So, those people you can convince of anything. You can convince them of anything. You can convince them that there's man-made climate change. You can convince them that the chemtrails are perfectly natural, even if they see John Brennan talking about aerosol injections and all this on record. But I'm talking about the silent majority of ordinary people. They now see through the agenda. They're no longer cooperating. They're no longer complying. We see the globalists throwing tantrums about misinformation and disinformation because it's frustrating their ability to carry out policy. We see them getting defeated in one, geopolitical theater after another. And I think that they are merely panicked. And so what does it mean if they manage to put Kamala Harris in the White House? If Kamala Harris tomorrow orders the U.S. troop to attack China or Russia, will they obey? And my bet would be that they will not obey. For military to go to war and fight for their country and risk their lives, they have to be convinced. They could, maybe they could take orders from FDR, JFK, Ronald Reagan, maybe even Bush 43. But Kamala Harris, I don't see it.
I get all that, Alex, and I thank you for cheering me up a little bit. It's good to hear all that. But there are other things. There are battles we're losing. And one of them is to mass migration. I mean, they are literally flooding the countries of the West with aliens who have no place in those countries as they stand. They're not going to contribute very much to them. They can't. It just they don't fit. But they're relentlessly doing it. Ireland, it's all the time now. Then they went out around the world and advertised for people, and then they tell us that they're coming from war zones, but it's all young men, right? And you kind of think, well, if these are young men are fleeing war zones, shouldn't we be sending guns and rocket launchers out to the women and children so they can fight to protect themselves, because the men obviously have abandoned them? But nobody answers these questions. In fact, nobody in the mainstream ever asks those questions. And again, it's that pseudo-reality thing, because this is all about compassion, I call it, the dictatorship of compassion. It's like that you are obliged to because you claim to be a Christian, or you claim that you have to basically give not only the shirt off your back, but your underpants and your socks as well. And that's all pseudo, because, when all you have to do is look at these guys and they were doing this, and that they don't care about anybody. Like they've been injecting people with poison for the past 3.5 years, and they don't care about anybody. So, please don't tell me that you love dark-skinned people, because you don't like any people, clearly. And yet people, are blackmailed by this nonsense. And so, that the whole culture, I mean, they tell us then that we have a demographic crisis. Yeah, we do actually. But how did that come about? Well, it came about because you drove the prices of houses up to the roof. 100,000 Irish people went to Australia last year, young people, and 250,000 came in from other countries. No comparison, we had 10,000 abortions. Could we not kill those children and maybe work on our demographic a little bit? Why do we have to change the nature of Ireland so it doesn't any longer be Ireland? But, that's racist. Oh, right, yeah, okay. Well, actually, no, as a friend of mine says, no, it's culturalist. He says, I kind of insist that our culture is somewhat better than one which buries a woman up to her waist in the sand before stoning her for adultery. I think our culture is better than that. It's not relative. It's not the same. Can we at least agree on that? No, we can't. That's racist too. All this nonsense. So, what Alex is right in the sense that they're losing all these wars, in a sense, or they're losing all these bets on wars. But at the same time, they're winning in other areas. And at the end of the day, even to the extent that we win that battle, ultimately it'll be Pyrrhic because, we won't be here anymore. They're actually disappearing us. They're disappearing our peoples. They're disappearing our nations.
I think that is true. And I wouldn't say that we're clear from danger. But, I would draw a difference between destroying things and winning, because just as you see in the war in Ukraine and other wars, both sides can blow things up, but winning is a much bigger deal. And we can see Ukrainian side trying to blow the Kirk Bridge, and once they even succeeded, they can launch terror attacks inside Russia. They can blow up things, but they have no way to prevail. That's a very, very different category of things, saying winning. And even if you have a legitimate army and you send it to invade and conquer a country, that conquest can never hold unless it gets popular support, unless the population actually supports that army. And so what you have now is hordes of immigrants flooding into Europe, but they will never have support of the local populations, and eventually it'll become untenable. I don't think that this will succeed in the long run. It is going to cause a lot of pain, a lot of damage, and heartbreak for the Irish people and all other peoples around Europe and the Western countries that are being flooded by immigrants. But that's not to, I think that there's a very big difference between sustaining that damage and the globalists actually winning and prevailing with those measures. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think these conversations inspire people, because I was talking to Melissa Chumé yesterday. I know you know her, Alex. And John, she's familiar with you. I don't know if you know her. She's in Northern Ireland.
Of course, John knows Melissa.
Yeah, no, she's great. And she was talking about, we were having a conversation very similar to this, and just kind of on the economic end of things primarily, but, about this idea of, sending her son to war, and she said he's not going to go to a war for a bunch of rich men, and I say the same thing, they're trying to reinstitute selective service here. And I mean, my son's not going to go fight for, it just. And I think that's the difference. I was going to ask you both the question. I know this is sort of going sideways, but sometimes my brain comes up with these things in a moment. But I think there is something to be said for, John, you write about it, your passion for your country. And I think you're right. You just wrote a recent, maybe a week ago, about why the Irish are the target. And it is because the Irish are well liked. There's a tradition. There's this, there's all this. It's a unique group of people that sort of does have, you want to kill the spirit of humanity, that certainly is a good place to start. And, but I'm thinking, the other hand, and I tend to lean to Alex, because the thought of Trump being a part of the problem, I mean, then in my mind, good Lord, then what? I guess like you said, Alex, when I first met you, the Americans still have their guns. I mean, is that what it gets to? But, there are people out there. I don't know if either of you have heard of this Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano.
Yeah.
But he's out there, speaking. Oh, I mean, this guy, he's like, because my question was going to be, is there anybody in Europe that really sort of is that person that, the hope of that emerging leader person that really speaks to the people, that's not owned, that, like sort of like the Trump figure we hope is the one that, is why he's getting targeted, like you were explaining, Alex. There's got to be a reason. And anyway, but Vigano, I mean, this guy just, he got excommunicated. He's been going against the Pope for, I don't know how long. I mean, back in 2020, he was writing letters to Trump that were beautiful, that laid out this whole battle. And, and so I feel like there's some point where people, as they wake up, come out of their coma, and I'm speaking for one that just started to see things 4 years ago during the COVID. So I'm not like, I'm a newbie in that sense, but I think there's more people. I'm just curious. Is there anybody that kind of comes to your mind? I mean, Orban, I don't know, in Hungary, is he a guy?
Yeah, Orban. Yeah.
You have one on your podcast.
Oh,
today.
Tom?
John Waters?
Oh, yes. Okay.
I'm not trying to pass a cheap compliment, but obviously John has difficulty reaching the Irish public, as he mentioned, But to me, that means there must be thousands of people across Europe like that, who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to send the right message, but they're being silenced. But I think it's only a matter of time before their voice manages to penetrate through.
Yeah, I think that's right, Alex. In this sense, that there are lots of people, but the whole panoply of events and repercussions that flow out of what happened in 2020. The complexity of those is having all kinds of weird undertow effects on culture. One of them has very much to do with the mRNA poison jabs, which is that there's this weird thing now where there's a consciousness of growing about the effects of those, but equally growing at the same time is denial of those effects or an avoidance of it. And it's really understandable, that people who maybe have taken a lethal jab or their children or whatever, and all of this. And people are, because that's mixed in there, that's keeping an awful lot of people away from everything else as well. That they just don't want to go into any of this stuff because to do so would mean having to look. I kind of know this from talking even among myself and my family and friends, that you get this strange effect whereby, even those of us who know what's happened, but if there's some loved one that we're fearful for, we don't know exactly what their status is. We're concerned, and suddenly they got a flu and it's really bad and it's not getting better, and you think you start fretful. But what I found in myself and others, when that happens, I become utterly defensive. In a particular situation, my wife might start asking me a question about somebody. And, well, what did you say to that person? And I say, well, look, let's leave it. And so I'm doing that thing. I'm operating that denial in that thing for the very good reason that I can't bear to think that this person could be doomed. That's even to say that hurts me grievously. So that's what I that all of that then is like a Lego set. It's all clicked together, and it's in there in the middle, and you can't isolate that piece because Trump is related to that, and the elections, and and your position on climate change, all of those things, and it's all got to do with that. I call it mutism that descends on people. It's that they have this. It started in Ireland first about 10 years ago with the referendum on gay marriage, where these kind of goons, LGBT goons, descended on our population and basically told them there are certain things you can't say anymore, and there are certain things you can't even think about anymore. Is that all right, Jay? You got that? No. Okay, continue. And that's the way it's kind of gone on for the last decade. And now the good news is that, going back to Alex's point about the Olympics and France, is that I think that's the end of it now. That's kind of like they're so tone deaf now that people who were tolerant of them before, tolerant means basically keeping your mouth shut and keeping a fixed smile on your face while a bunch of gobshites are destroying your civilization, and you're saying, oh yeah, I'm quite happy. I'm happy with my civilization being pissed upon, Yeah, I'm happy. I'm good with that. But that's going to stop now. I think they say, okay, enough already. Just get off the stage and shut up. Right? That's what I think is next. And hopefully that will be next. So it's complicated. I mean, so in Ireland, certainly, I don't know. I know there are signs of awakening in different situations internationally. In Ireland, we thought we had one back in March where there was a couple of referendums about family-related issues, and suddenly, just about 3 weeks before, like it was all runaway. Yes. The government wanted to impose all these things. It had to do with mass migration, it had to do with all kinds of sneaky things. But people started to wake up and we started putting out the message, and we won 75-25 in the end. And we thought, wow, it's a revolution. But not a single vote of that translated into any of the elections 2 months later, 3 months later.
Yeah, because they were rigged, probably.
Well, that's right. They were rigged. Of course they were. They were bussing in, as I say. They were bussing in.
That would explain it.
Yeah. That's what, sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Occam's razor.
Well, this is the strange thing about running for elections, that at a certain point, in a certain way, you kind of factor that out, because you kind of expect it to happen anyway, and you say, okay, we still have to kind of beat them, even though they're going to do that. And when you don't, then you're still kind of surprised or disappointed. So you shouldn't be at all, of course. But that's just how mad we are.
You brought up a good point. I'm glad I asked that question, because you're right. Guys like John and I think yourself, I mean, you're both very outspoken, and I think people, I mean, even some of the conversation here, if I was having this interview with 2 years ago, I'd probably be a little more, more reserved. But it just seems like at this point, I mean, good Lord, I mean, you hold back, it's like death. I mean, you got to put it out there. And I will say from my side, just my little pond or whatever people I interact with, people are seeing things, people are waking up, and they're realizing too, and this was a point that came up, I think I've probably talked to both of you at one time or another about it, that yeah, even, and it's come up here, you can't, just because a person gets elected, I mean, it's not like all of a sudden there's this, we don't have, this is not the savior. We have work to do in this, empowering people to not be afraid to get out there and do what you did, John and Alex. I mean, I know you travel all over the place and you're speaking out. Even like, Better Way conference a year ago. I mean, that was pretty, in the context of, I mean, even a year ago, that was a very, I don't know if controversial is the word, but certainly, I mean, you had a group of people there that were taking a risk and sticking their neck out, pushing back against a lot of things at the time. And so, I think, I'm seeing the fruits of that. I'm seeing, my clients with our firm who just are starting to really realize, things don't add up. But seems to be a higher consciousness. And so I think that's been for me, if there is a positive, that's it, because at some point we're all going to be called upon, I think, to really take ownership of our future, ourselves, and everybody is in a different place where they're going to influence. But, it's like that movie, it's crazy. It is ants, there's a lot more of us than there are them. And I think that's going to matter. I really do, because, anyhow, any final thoughts? I'll go to you, John, and then Alex, why don't you close this out, and I'll let you get on with your evening, because I know it's later there than it is here.
It's been really good, and particularly listen to Alex. I mean, it's very good to hear that kind of, and it isn't just the Pollyanna stuff. It's positive, and it's constructive, and it's real. This is complex. There are little pockets of different entities, and different forces, and it's good to hear that. And I vacillate between optimism and despair. I mean, that's just the nature of this. Sometimes you think, there's a chink of light here, and you pursue it and you follow it, and maybe it comes to nothing. But it's the point is to keep your heart strong and keep hopeful. And ultimately, I do think we can defeat them. Because this is the nature of human reality, is that ultimately good triumphs, because otherwise none of us would be here. The life wouldn't have gone on in this way. So, these people want to destroy humanity. They want to destroy the world. That's not going to happen, because humanity at a certain point will switch into a more fundamentalist position. Not that, the material won't matter. People will, when they come to realize that, they will come, and then, they will realize that, their nations, their families, their relationship with the world is what matters, and that these are fundamental, and that they must be fought for. And that, I just think that, it's quite bizarre that we're fighting this thing for the last 4 years, and it has no authority whatsoever. It has no energy that can be described as deriving from anything other than evil. Right through the systems we're talking about, the people have not given any acquiescence to this at all, at any point, except in a certain passive way, because they're terrified of some stupid virus or something. But So once people realize what's at stake, that's the hard thing. And that's, again, going back to the election, that is, it just became, one of the problems was it was impossible to use the election really to be effectively to tell people effectively what was happening and what they needed to be aware of. But if we keep going, we will find the code and we will break through to them. And once we do, that, I think, is it. Because I don't think that, you see, these people can't prevail with violence, even though they can buy all the police force and all the armies. We're still more numerous than they are. And ultimately, I think, to go back to what I said about the three V's, the violent insurrection, velvet revolution, or voting. Well, I still have a hope for that velvet revolution, because that's what happened in Prague in 1989, when because the rumor went around that one student had been killed by the police. A million people just went onto the streets spontaneously by word of mouth and pulled down the communist regime and installed Václav Havel as president. And that's the most hopeful thing. I think that's the probably the most likely thing that will happen in our countries at the end of this, and I hope it is the end. I don't cherish or welcome or the prospect of a violent insurrection anywhere. That's always going to be bad, because that's the Combine and their minions like that they're trying to foment that. They're trying to instigate that all the time, antagonize people and make them retaliate. And the voting, well, we tried it, and maybe we'll try it again. Who knows? Never say never. But it's not a very adaptable instrument at the moment for what we need to do.
Thank you. Yeah. Alex?
We are at a unique point in history. Unique because we today, this generation of people, have something that no generation before us has had, which is the internet and the social media. And for the first time in history ever, we no longer depend on printed media like newspapers, radio, and television. We have information flowing from point to point almost instantaneously, and most of it cannot be controlled by anybody. And I think that makes such a huge difference that it might even be, we might even be able to compare it to humanity growing a nervous system. Until now we were a blob, maybe like a jellyfish carried by currents and responding to immediate stimuli from our environment. With a nervous system, we can act to a large extent in a deliberate way. We can decide our own course and move in that course, in that direction deliberately. I think that this is an enormously powerful thing, and you can tell that it is by the reactions of the people in power, because this year in January in Davos, we saw John Kerry, Ursula von der Leyen, and I think was it Mitt Romney or somebody like that, absolutely throw tantrums about misinformation and disinformation. And Ursula von der Leyen said that it was a greater enemy than even Russia and global terrorism, because it was frustrating their ability to implement policy, which to my mind is a different way of saying that we are winning and they are losing. And so I think that what we just need to do is carry on, continue, questioning, uncovering the truth, and spreading it. Regardless of, can you speak to 2 other people or 10 other people or a million other people? I think that for every one of us who care to live a better world to our children and future generations, this is what we have to do. We have to fight for the truth. And then, as the saying goes, the truth, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. I think that we are well on the way to realizing that ideal. So I feel very, very encouraged. And, no matter how dark the moment is, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and all we have to do is put one foot in front of the other, and we'll do well.
I appreciate you both, and I think, Alex, again, you brought up a good point in that the heroes really are, at the end of the day, each of us and everybody who's just taken one step to push back, whatever that looks like. And, it's inspiring to me. We've done that in our work, with our approach. There's a narrative in the financial industry. We push back on it, and we're making little inroads, as time has gone on. And and maybe it's not a big deal, but again, it's one little brick that gets added to this what we're building. And what's just inspiring about it is, connecting with men like you and other people I've had a chance to connect with that are doing the same thing. And it's like you said, John, you realize there's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of people that are doing these things in their own little way. And so, there's power in that, like you said, Alex. So I appreciate you both. I got to tell you, I love you guys. You're just good men and you're good human beings and you're out there and you care, and I think that's the thing that inspires the other people that, listen to these conversations is they realize they're not alone in their thoughts. They realize that, you can go out and take a risk and stick your neck out and live to fight another day. Just God bless you both. Thanks for coming back on and giving me the time today and sharing your thoughts. And it's great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emerson.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Emerson. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.